folks, Denny over at TheraThink here, and today we're walking through telehealth billing for therapists. Yeehaw! But seriously, this is a super important topic, especially in 2022, as we are coming out of a global wide uh, viral phenomenon. And folks in the mental health space specifically are able to continue to conduct telehealth billing services. I think this has been a really positive outcome in an otherwise challenging and bleak situation. And without going into too much more detail about that, let's go ahead and just dive into some specific information that you folks out there, you clinicians, licensed mental health providers, are going to need to make sure that you're conducting telehealth billing appropriately for your practice. Before we begin, though, if you have any other questions about insurance billing or you're looking to offload all of this completely, the idea of sitting through a 10 or 15-minute video makes you want to pull your hair out, then feel free to reach out to us over at therathink.com/billing-service to get in touch with our team and see if we might be a good fit for actually professional services to help you do all this stuff. And I unfortunately have some bad news about telehealth billing, which is that it is really insurance company specific. And as such, there's going to be quite a bit of information that will be required of you to obtain to make sure that you do a good job with your insurance billing for telehealth sessions. So a lot of folks reach out to us and have reached out to us for those exact reasons. We do help with it, and we do have quite a database of modifiers and place of service codes that are required for telehealth billing. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. One of the most important things to note getting started here is that insurance billing for telehealth is not categorically different from a CPT code perspective. There isn't a insurance telehealth billing CPT code for mental health services. Not really. So you want to make sure that you're using the right CPT codes in your practice. And we have guides on many different CPT codes over at therathink.com, so you can learn about those. We have a master list of them with lots of individual links going to each written CPT code guide. But it's important again to note that the thing that is important, that is different about telehealth billing, is not the CPT code. It's about modifiers, place of service codes, and ultimately an eligibility and benefits review phone call to find out that information. So speaking of eligibility and benefits verification, we have a script here. Really good idea to use the script or something like it when making a phone call over to insurance. Um, and it goes one by one, helps you understand what to be asking about when making a phone call. One of the most important parts, specifically though, will be to ask if the client in question has approval for telehealth billing services. And if they do, what modifier is the insurance company using? Now, sometimes the reps on these phone calls won't tell you the right modifier to use. It is frustrating. This is where, again, having a professional is really helpful. But you just try. Try hard. They might refer you to a Medicare billing guide or something like that and say, Google it. I'm sorry if they do. It's very frustrating. But in general, the modifiers that you're going to want to be asking about specifically are the 9.5 modifier and the GT modifier. These are modifiers that are used on CMS 1500 claims forms when submitting your billing. They're going to be modifiers to a CPT code. They are not in place of a CPT code. They are modifiers that amend or describe more specifically certain procedural codes that are being used. And that descriptor is going to be described that they are conducted under a telehealth billing, telehealth services context, and the modifiers in question are going to be 9.5 and GT most of the time. We'll talk about a few others, but again, those are the ones that you really want to ask about. And it's a good idea in general to make sure to ask and make this phone call up front. It's almost always harder to fix claims than to submit them right the first time. few other things to talk about too: place of service codes, um, and and just a general eligibility and benefits. So if authorization is required for telehealth services, if you're out of network, you might have less likelihood of being able to see a client with telehealth. It's a good idea to ask about all those different things. Now again, there are a couple of CPT codes that are technically legacy CPT codes for telehealth. These are not used often, if at all, anymore, especially in 2022 with the changes that have taken place. But it's worth noting these. Again, I would strongly recommend not using these codes. I think it's pretty much guaranteed that they will not pay out. So these are definitely legacy CPT codes. What more likely you're going to want to use are your EM service codes, diagnostic interviews for your intake sessions, your time-based individual psychotherapy codes for outpatient, maybe some add-on codes, family therapy, maybe group, things like that. All right, let's dive into the modifiers, and we're going to use an actual visual example here too to explain these. So most likely, as I mentioned, CPT code, I'm sorry, modifier 95 and GT are the modifiers to use. And I just want to zoom in if I can here. Let's see if I can do that a little better. And you'll notice here on the modifier section that the service code is on the left, place of service, the procedure code, and then the modifiers on the section D there. That's going to be the place to put that modifier. Okay. Now, the 95 modifier is a newer modifier. It has been used by primarily commercial insurance policies, less so with Medicare and Medicaid policies. But many insurance companies, because of the amount of complexity that the different modifiers and place of service codes have introduced, accept both. With that being said, though, many don't, and it's always a good idea to call and ask. Again, hey, client, hey, representative, on this insurance billing phone call that I'm making. Hope your day is going well. Can you please let me know? Should I be using the modifier 95 or the modifier GT when I'm conducting my individual outpatient mental health therapy services? Now I'll get into some definitions here about what constitutes a telehealth um, service, but I hope most of you folks at this point know. Um, it is a synchronized, meaning at the same time, real-time interaction between a qualified mental health professional and a client. One thing we'll get to eventually is the place of service code and a new code, place of service code that has been introduced to help capture a bit more nuance when it comes to where these sessions are occurring. But in general, they're going to be at home, in office, or at um, a hospital. And again, it's just important to be asking about these modifiers. I can't reiterate that enough. This code was created initially to replace the GT modifier, but Medicare and Medicaid do continue to use GT. All right, so let's get into the GT. It is, again, typically used to describe this synchronous, at the same time, telehealth services that are rendered in the same manner as typically a face-to-face session would be rendered. Um, Video being the primary methodology here for rendering these services. If it's required for audio only, then Medicare does deem that acceptable, but most insurance companies are going to require video telehealth conferencing. Now, a couple other modifiers that are really not used: GQ and G0. These are incredibly rare, and they basically are describing either an asynchronous telehealth service or services that are rendered where someone's trying to quickly assess if someone is having a stroke at a distance. Again, these are services that pretty much all mental health insurance will not be dealing with. Let's get into place of service codes. Ooh, yeehaw. Okay, now As you probably don't know, the place of service code for a traditional session in person face to face is 11. That's going to be an in office place of service code. You can see visually where to annotate that on this section of the CMS 1500 form. It's going to be in 24 part B here. You're going to want to type in for traditional face to face session 11. But if it's therapy at a distance, if it's telehealth video conferencing, you're going to want to use one of two place of service codes, POS codes. Now, before 2022, uh, when Medicare has decided to launch in April a new place of service code to create some nuance surrounding these, most likely the place of service code that you had been using before then was POS02. And that's going to describe telehealth video services provided outside of the patient's home, more likely just telehealth video services. Now, in 2022, there has been nuance added to that, and that's going to be other than the patient's home themselves. Okay, so if the sessions are not conducted at a private home or location for the client themselves, place of service 2 will be used. Maybe I got that wrong. If they're conducted, yeah, basically if they're conducted at a hospital or some other spot that is secure, POS2 in 2022 is the service code to be using. The place of service code specifically. POS 10 is now describing in treatment, telehealth video conferencing treatment in the patient's home. This is now the new place of service code that you will want to be using when describing telehealth services that are being rendered. So it's important to make this change. This change has not yet taken place over some insurance companies in 2022. Strangely enough, Medicare, the dictating organization who has introduced this code, is one of the last insurance companies to implement the code. Surprise, surprise. All right. So here's a great example of how this would look. You're going to want to use traditionally, of course, you want to implement the date of service here. You're going to want to use the place of service code, in this case 2. There's an intake session 90791 for the CPT code, and then the modifier 95. This modifier is describing telehealth video conferencing um, related to the procedure code, and this place of service is describing where those services were rendered. So you need to use the right combination of place of service code and of telehealth video conferencing modifier. And each of these depend on the insurance company in question. Sorry, that is just how it is today. These are one of those cases where you'd think it would be very straightforward, but it's not. Over at TheraThink, we do make this really straightforward for you, I have to say. We make it so that when you see a session or a client in session on telehealth, you click a tick box that says telehealth, and we take care of the rest. We help you describe the nuance related to the place of service and the right modifier without you needing to be involved. And if there are any nuances that need to be captured outside of those, we make sure to do so as well. And that's where we're in dialogue with the providers that we work with to make sure that we're accurately billing sessions for our providers. We do have some specific information here, insurance company by insurance company, about when they are implementing these place of service 10 codes, and some actual PDFs for proof, just to make things official for you folks. You can go ahead and take a look at that too. This guide is downloadable in PDF format over our website at therathink.com, and you can Google telehealth billing for therapists and find this guide, or TheraThink telehealth billing. Let me get you right here as well. Of course, if you do need insurance billing help, feel free to reach out to us at therathink.com/billing-service. More than happy to talk to your situation and potentially take all this off your plate. After all, this isn't really what you went to school for. You might want to focus more on what you do best and have help with the things that frankly aren't very fun in terms of the professional life of a private practice therapist. So we'd be happy to help with that. Happy to provide some advice too. If you are looking to do this on your own, no problems. You can go ahead and learn more about that over at our billing guide section. We do have a specific link here for this telehealth billing for therapists guide. We also have information for beginners, as well as CPT code information, insurance reimbursement rate information for providers and psychiatrists. We also have some great tools here for understanding insurance company rate comparisons, negotiating rates with templates, a diagnosis and CPT code finder to make that a little bit easier. So you can just type something in English and figure out what codes, diagnoses, and CPT codes to use. We also have a couple of cheat sheets and an intake form for your use as well, all free, of course. Feel free to reach out to us over at therethink.com to get that information. There's no opt-in or anything like that. You just go ahead and download it. We're not trying to gatekeep anything here. Hopefully you guys found this useful. If you did, go ahead and give it a like on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube. Appreciate the patience and good luck with your billing. Feel free to reach out to us at therathink.com with more questions. And until then, thanks again.